Hello and welcome. You're watching Middle East Now on I24 News. I'm Laura Sellier and these are the headlines. Iran vows to respond to Israel's attack on its military sites and says the consequences will be bitter. The UN Security Council meeting tonight to discuss the attack after Iraq filed a complaint against Israel for using its airspace. And signs of progress in hostage negotiations in Doha, where Qatari, Egyptian and American proposals are being discussed. Iran has warned of bitter, unimaginable consequences for Israel following its airstrikes on Iranian military targets on Saturday night. The UN Security Council will meet tonight to discuss the strikes, which Israel says targeted drone and ballistic missile manufacturing and launch sites, as well as air defence batteries. More in this report from our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osseran.
The United Nations Security Council is convening on Monday to discuss Israel's attack on Iran over the weekend. Prior to the session, Iraq submitted to the UN an official complaint against Israel, condemning its, quote, flagrant violation of its sovereignty for using Iraqi airspace in the strike. Just 2 days ago, though, Baghdad struck a different tone, denying Israel had breached its airspace.
Iraq has distanced its airspace from open conflict, despite attempts to drag us into one. We stand in solidarity with the Islamic Republic of Iran and stand against this aggression. Therefore, it is unreasonable that the Iraqi airspace was used for this aggression.
Images on social media from Iraq even showed fragments of missiles used by Israel that fell in an area north of Baghdad. Adding to the absurdity, Iraqi Shiite militias claimed responsibility for launching an attack drone at northern Israel early Monday. الموت لأمريكا الموت لإسرائيل اللعنة على اليهود. Meanwhile, the scope of the damage dealt to Iran over the weekend continues to emerge. Minutes before the first wave of Israeli strikes, several Iranian air defense radars were hacked, enabling IDF planes to enter Iran's airspace unhindered. In addition to eliminating numerous air defense batteries and drone manufacturing sites, satellite images show damage to 2 secret bases used to mix solid fuel for ballistic missiles in Parchin and Khojir, near Tehran. After initially downplaying the severity of the Israeli strikes, the commander of Iran's Revolutionary Guards warned Israel of, quote, unimaginable consequences.
Our position is clear. We are using all available means to respond firmly and effectively to the aggression of the Zionist regime. Basically, the nature of our response will depend on the nature of the attack.
Iran now faces tough choices in its decision how to respond to Israel's strikes. As for Israel, it managed to expose vulnerabilities in Iran's air defenses, enabling it to easily step up future attacks on Iran if it chooses.
And Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu elaborating on those strikes when he opened the Knesset earlier. He says that Israel struck Iranian factories of death. To talk a bit more about that, I'm joined in the studio this hour by Yaki Dayan. He is the former Israeli consul in Los Angeles. Great to have you with us, Yaki.
Good evening, Laura.
So let's talk about the strike. I mean, the Iranians were downplaying it. They now say they will respond. And looking at Benjamin Netanyahu's comments earlier, he is saying quite clearly that it wasn't the White House that convinced him to scale down the attacks, because we were talking about something much bigger originally, weren't we?
Well, I would take it with a grain of salt, but I think it was a phenomenal strike and a phenomenal execution of the strike. But it was with very deep cooperation with the U.S. administration, I would say, because at the beginning, the scale and the scope that the Israelis thought about had been much larger than what was done at the end. But the Americans said, listen, we have elections on November 5th, and we want some kind of a contained strike, something that wouldn't lead to an overall war in the Middle East, a war that would jeopardize American soldiers. That's the biggest fear that the Americans had. And there was a very, I would say, a large scale of cooperation with the Americans on the intelligence, on the airspace, on many other aspects. So eventually, I think that because of the cooperation and no doubt the defense systems that the Americans provided to the Israelis, so it was contained. but I think that the execution and the message were extremely strong. So at the end of the day, that was a very good strike.
All right, Yaki, for now, thank you very much. While more details have emerged about just how that attack unfolded on Saturday night, the Independent Persian publishing an account today of what happened. And we're joined now by the paper's editor-in-chief, Camelia Entekabifard. Wonderful to see you, Camelia. And you report today that the Iranian defense radar systems were hacked just a few minutes before the attack began, and that essentially disabled Iran's air defenses. How big a part did that play in allowing the attack to take place?
Thank you, dearest Lara, for hosting, and good evening to everyone. We had a couple of sources for this report sitting in Iran that have spoken with us, and they were elaborated. The attack happened when some of these defense systems, but I have to say that they were speaking about those S-300 defense system has been paralyzed. And then when they reached the headquarters, they had an order to use the different radar system, which it doesn't make them capable to use the S-300, and they went to another missile, the defense system, to confront the Israeli attack. Time is the best friend. It would tell us later if this report can be confirmed. But the places as Israelis were confirmed, and we saw that on the map. Mainly it sounds like the energy sectors and some of the military bases defense system has been attacked. It looked like Israeli wanted to show they can dismantle some of the air system defenses in order, if that would be the retaliation from the regime, then they can hit some other key areas if it needed, which I hope never ever happen, and the two countries make peace and the war never happened between both of them.
Okay, and Iran, meanwhile, has been trying to downplay the attack, hasn't it, to its own people. But just how much do the Iranian people know about what happened on Saturday night?
Many Iranians woke up hearing the defense system were alerting and shooting missiles. And since these places are not close to the civilian populated area, these damages couldn't be heard by them, and they were not near the big cities or the populated cities. Usually these places are outside of the town and haven't heard the explosion from the missile hitting the ground. But there is another aspect of this story. Iranians, since years, they want to make the regime changes, and regardless, they're thinking the consequences of these attacks, they were thinking the regime changes is next when such things is happening in Iran. And we heard that the Americans said clearly they are not after regime changes in Iran. This Biden administration said that. No one supporting any foreign attack against Iran. So this is a national sentiment. But at the same time, they were thinking Israeli have to defend itself against of the terrorism. And this terrorism can be any sort of the regional terror against of the Israelis. This back and forth between Iran and Israel divided our nation in Iran between two camps. Some people were supporting and some people were against. And when you are at this between, even reporting becomes so difficult because of the nationalism in one part, and the other side, people doesn't support the Islamic Republic. That is a wave, I can tell you, the Islamic Republic can relay on. And people who were thinking why the nation should be at this level, which Israeli can attack, they would accusing them to this conspiracy of acting against of the national security and espionages. And when people were saying the defense should be much stronger, at this point, some other Iranian attacking them and thinking why Islamic Republic have to interfere in the regional situation and support terrors, which makes the country so vulnerable. So the situation is kind of very complicated in Iran.
Fascinating insight, as always. Camelia Entekabifad, thank you. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Yaki Dayab with me in the studio. Yaki, do you think we're now entering into a period of long-term ping-pong between Iran and Israel when it comes to these strikes and counter-strikes? Or do you think Israel has a systematic strategy of peeling back Iran's defence so it can ultimately go for those nuclear sites?
That's the $1 million question, because I think the strike was extremely positive because it hit the air systems, the entire air systems, defence systems that the Iranians have, and also their missile factories. Now, if the Iranians respond, what the Americans told the Iranians, listen, if now you strike again a reaction to the Israelis, then we might not contain Israel. Israel might strike much harder than that. So there are even people in Israel that wish that the Iranians will strike back, because then the strike is going to be much harsher. And much harsher includes two sections that till now we didn't touch them. One is the energy sector, and the other one is the nuclear sector. So those two sectors are extremely vulnerable now, because the Iranians don't have the air defense system. And if the Iranians hit back, then the next Israeli strike might hit that, and the Iranians should take that into consideration.
They're much more vulnerable now. Yaki,
absolutely.
Thank you. Well, Iran is taking its case to the UN Security Council, a case which is backed up by Iraq, which has formally complained about Israel using its airspace during Saturday's strikes. Iraq also says the United States was complicit in the attack. Iranian-backed militia in Iraq have been attacking Israel directly since October 7th, and the UN Security Council will meet tonight to discuss the situation. Well, for more on that, we're joined by Entifad Kambar. He's the president and founder of the Kurdish Protection Action Committee and the former spokesman for the Deputy Prime Minister of Iraq. Good to have you with us, Entifad. So the initial complaint came not from the Iraqi government in Baghdad, but from Kataib Hezbollah. This is the Iranian-backed militia in Iraq. Does the Iraqi government then share the position of this terrorist group?
Well, good to see you, Laura. Hello from Michigan with the Trump's campaign. What's happening now, Laura, is Kataib Hezbollah, although the Prime Minister of Iraq speaks from one side of his mouth, said Iraq should have 70, there should be no terrorism from Iraq. And the other side of his mouth, he talks to them and they are part of his government. And this is not a rumor when I tell you, it's a reality. It's imprinted and published and approved by the Iraqi parliament that those militias, including Kataib Hezbollah, Asaib al-Haq, al-Nujaba, which are bombarding Israel almost on daily basis now, are on the government payroll. And the chief of staff of the PMF, General Abu Fadak, he is also, he said on TV, on the record, that he's waiting for orders from Khamenei. He's also on the Iraqi payroll using Iraqi IDs. Iraqi government IDs, have access to the highest security quarters in the Iraqi government. At the same time, the Iraqi government punishing the Kurds, which are the allies of the United States. So what we have now, awarding the enemies of Israel and the United States, punishing the friends and allies of the United States, the Kurds. But the biggest problem, even bigger, the United States is approving and endorsing this policy and are accepting it, which is outrageous.
And how would Donald Trump's policy be different on Iraq?
I think Donald Trump has what I'd like to call it, a moral clarity. The friends of the United States will be naturally awarded. It's a common sense versus lunacy, I call it. The lunacy of awarding Iranian proxies and awarding Iran by the current administration versus the common sense. Those are the enemies of the United States. The Iranians are hacking the United States, are spying on the United States, trying to commit terrorism on United States soil. All the intelligence community said that there are serious attempts to kill President Trump on American soil. So the common sense, it doesn't need more. A 9-year-old child will understand you have to stand against Iran. However, the current administration awarding Iran, allowing Iran to make money over $100 billion. And tell me, I just want to tell you, The 7th of October was a natural result of this allowing Iran to fund. The current administration, believe it or not, removed sanctions on the Houthis on February 5th, 2022. And now the Houthis are controlling the seas and cutting all the ship movements. So what we have now...
That's true. Sorry to interrupt. That's true, Intifad. But former President Trump has said he wants to end foreign wars. Are you not concerned that he will move troops out of Iraq more quickly?
Actually, he is more of a peace with strength. He will use a surgical military operations to kill terrorists, to eliminate those who are bad actors, as the way he killed Qasem Soleimani, the most notorious terrorist in the history of mankind, and Abu Mahdi with him. And I don't think he will hesitate to do it on. I spoke to his campaign quite a bit and on details with Mr. Richard Grenell, with Senator Graham. I saw him last week on the campaign. And they all saying, we are not for open wars. We're not for sending big armies and create wars, but we are at the same time in favor of peace with strength, and we're going to enforce peace. Peace is not a romantic word you can enforce. Peace has to be enforced by a powerful American policy, foreign policy, American national security, and also sometimes surgical military operations.
Well, enjoy Michigan, Intifad. Great to talk to you as always. Intifad Kambar there. Thank you.
Thank you.
While Israel continues to strike Hezbollah targets inside Lebanon, meanwhile, air raid sirens have been blaring across Israel's northern communities today, including in the city of Haifa. Our Zach Andrews is up there for us now. Zach, what's happening?
Well, probably what is going to be played quite a bit is going to be these strikes in Tyre. These are impressive and massive in scale. It follows an IDF Arabic spokesperson's call to evacuate this area of the city in Tyre. This is a very old city. It's got a UNESCO World Heritage Site. But here the IDF says that Hezbollah and its Aziz unit, which is commands the southwestern portion along the coast of Hezbollah's forces, the IDF saying that inside Tyre they were producing weapons and that had different facilities for this Aziz unit that they were targeting. We don't have a clear picture of casualties right now in these Tyre strikes, which potentially indicates that that call to evacuate was successful. Noted that there was several Arabic-speaking television networks that were had fixed live camera positions around this evacuation zone. So it does appear that a lot of people heard to get out of this area. But the strikes were within 2 hours of the initial call to evacuate. But just based on the number of cameras that we saw filming some of the strikes live, it does appear that a lot of people did get out of there before these strikes began. We've also been tracking strikes in the Baalbek Valley once again, the Bekaa Valley near Baalbek. What we're seeing there is earlier calls on Hezbollah-affiliated Telegram channels to send ambulances. Large number of casualties reported, but again, we're at this stage in the conflict now where Hezbollah is not reporting any of the losses on their end. They have, at this point in the day, claimed responsibility for 12 attacks in northern Israel. What we're seeing here, the IDF telling me before 4 p.m., 115 different projectiles launched from Lebanon into northern Israel. No reports of casualties, no significant damage. However, fires started throughout the Galilee and in the Golan.
Zach, thank you very much for that update. Zach Andrews there up in the north of Israel. Yaki Dayan is with me in the studio. And Yaki, we've kind of taken our eyes off Lebanon slightly, given the situation with Iran. But the IDF has suffered some pretty heavy losses in Lebanon in recent days. Are you worried about Israel getting bogged down there?
No, listen, they're doing their job, and it's a war, so there is a heavy price, but it's directly connected to Iran. I mean, the Iranians are running the operation right now in Lebanon, and what's going on in Lebanon on the strategic level is that the U.S. envoy, Hochstein, is coming tomorrow, and basically what is discussed is some kind of a package deal between Lebanon and Israel, in which the Americans will impose a weapon embargo on the Hezbollah, in order that the Hezbollah will not be able to regroup, and Israel will have the right to strike if it's being violated. So those are the elements that are being put, and in return, Israel will not expand the ground operation, meaning they will stop in the near villages, and they will not go all the way to the Litani. This is what's being discussed right now, and if this doesn't work, so Israel has to expand and go all the way in the ground operation till the Litani. But I think that relatively, we were afraid that we would pay a much heavier price than what Israel is paying now, although it's a difficult and terrible price, but it's lower than what was estimated when before the war started in Lebanon.
Yaki, for now, thank you. Well, let's take a look at the reaction of some of the Arab states to Israel's attack on Iran. Saudi Arabia condemned it, calling it a violation of Iran's sovereignty and of international law. To talk more about that, we're joined by Loai Al-Sharif, peace activist and expert in Arab-Israeli relations. Great to have you with us, Loai. And, I mean, Israel would have hoped that the Saudis would take their side in the war with the Islamic Republic, but actually Riyadh was one of the first countries to condemn it. Why is that?
Well, Laura, my personal opinion, Saudi Arabia's response reflects a principled approach rather than a choice of sides. It's very important to know that I know that many people know, but there are no diplomatic ties with Israel or between Saudi Arabia and Israel at the time being. By condemning any violation of sovereignty, Riyadh aligns itself with the framework of peace, encouraging restraints and promoting diplomatic pathways over military escalation. It's less about, Laura, supporting one nation over another, and more about emphasizing the need for all regional actors to respect each other's sovereignty and security. I believe if Saudi Arabia and Israel were having peace agreement, that statement would look different.
Well, the Israelis are a little worried because this comes just a few days after an actual joint military drill between Saudi Arabia and Iran in the Gulf of Oman, a naval drill. Has Saudi Arabia decided that the Islamic Republic is here to stay and they better learn to get along with them?
Well, that drill really signals something, but not the thing that many people think. The recent joint drill, in my opinion, Laura, signals Saudi Arabia's pragmatic approach in acknowledging the presence of Iran as an influential regional power, rather than endorsing Iran's policies. It's totally different from endorsing the policy. Saudi Arabia seeks to foster open channels to address shared challenges, such as the maritime security. But this cooperation, in my opinion, illustrates a cautious but constructive engagement, recognizing the regional stability is often achieved through balanced relations rather than isolation or confrontation. But it's not in any way an endorsement of Iran's policies, I would say.
What about the U.S. election, Loai, now less than a week away? How does that affect the calculus in Riyadh?
Well, let me tell you just a general rule of thumb, Laura. In the Gulf or in many Arab states, usually the wave tides more into the Republicans, but that's my personal assessment. Saudi Arabia, in my personal assessment, like many nations, will carefully assess the outcome of the U.S. elections and any shifts in foreign policy. Regardless of the election results, Riyadh's focus will likely remain on maintaining stability in the region. Saudi Arabia's approach to Israel, this is very important, is more, I would say, reflective of its long-term vision for regional peace and cooperation rather than short-term politics shifts. I believe that if the White House, if the next president in the White House is determined about expanding the Abraham Accords and making it great again, inshallah, then we will see a very promising peace agreement between Saudi Arabia and Israel, and this will absolutely make a great change in the geopolitics in the Middle East. I'm very optimistic, by the way, Laura.
Yeah, you're going to call it? You're going to call it for us, Loai?
Of course, inshallah.
Inshallah, indeed. Great to talk to you, Loai, as always. We appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Laura.
Noaya Sharif, they're over in Abu Dhabi. Your reaction?
Apparently, Laura, Israel is not alone by supporting Trump and wanting Trump to be the next president for the Middle East. But I think that
Not all Israelis.
Not all Israelis. I would say not all Israelis. But if you speak about the Israeli government, at least, or the prime minister, I would say that there is a consensus here. And you know, two things struck me. One is the fear that the Saudi Arabia is now. The big fear from the Iranians that the Saudis have right now, because they don't have a defense treaty between them and the Americans. And I think that not only normalization with Israel, but this defense treaty would change not only the region, but the cooperation between Saudi Arabia and Iran, because they still remember that in 2019, when the Iranians struck half of the energy sector in Saudi Arabia.
They knocked off 5% of global oil supply.
Exactly. Donald Trump, that was the president back then, didn't do anything. And I think that they want assurances that they have defense system and defense treaty with the Americans before they disengage from the Iranians.
And you think this normalization accord is more likely under President Trump?
I think it would gain momentum after with the next president. But, you know, the Saudis are very adamant in requesting that that would be a path for a two-state solution. Mm-hmm. So as long as you don't include that, and currently the Israelis, after the October 7th, look at any concept of a two-state solution as a price for terrorism. So this is a big hurdle on the way to normalization, I would say.
Keith, thank you very much. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, the Mossad chief David Barnea has returned to Israel from Qatar after negotiating the latest proposals for a deal to free the 101 hostages still being held in Gaza. We'll get the very latest for you next. Stay with us.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Shalom. ¿Qué me trae por aquí? La necesidad impostergable de 600 millones de hispanoparlantes que ahora necesitan escuchar el mensaje judío e israelí en tiempos difíciles. ¿Cómo lograrlo? Cuento con ustedes para continuar llevando a lo más alto del mundo mediático una inquebrantable diplomacia pública al servicio de la verdad sin concesión alguna.
Je crois sur Dragon Ball.
Welcome back. The Mossad chief, David Barnea, is back in Israel from Doha, where he's been part of negotiations to free the remaining 101 hostages who are still being held in Gaza. Egyptian, Qatari and American proposals are being discussed. Our Jody Notilovitz has the detail.
As efforts are being made to try and end the more than a year-long war between Israel and Hamas, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has proposed a new hostage and ceasefire deal. This as Israel's Mossad intelligence chief, David Barnea, and CIA Director Bill Burns headed to Qatar to resume talks about moving a hostage release deal forward.
In Egypt, during the past few days, efforts have been made to move the situation towards a 2-day ceasefire, during which 4 hostages would be exchanged for some prisoners held in Israeli jails. Then, over the next 10 days, negotiations would proceed to complete measures in the area or to reach a full ceasefire and allow aid to enter.
Earlier this month, Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar was killed by IDF troops in a move that was described as an opportunity to make progress on a deal that would see the release of some or all the hostages. While Qatar is host to several top Hamas leaders, the terror group will not be involved in this round of meetings, as Israel explores the potential for a preliminary agreement aimed at understanding Hamas decision-making following Sinwar's death, though the potential for joining subsequent negotiations about a larger deal remains open. According to sources, Hamas may be willing to accept the Egyptian proposal as long as it is incorporated into its July 2nd demands, offering a detailed agreement to negotiators for the immediate cessation of the conflict, the evacuation of Israeli forces from the Gaza Strip, and the exchange of a number of Palestinian prisoners for the immediate release of all Israeli captives. Speaking at a memorial on Sunday for IDF troops killed on October 7th, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant admitted that not all of Israel's objectives can be achieved through military operations alone.
Power is not the essence of everything. To realize our moral and ethical duty to bring our hostages home, we will have to make painful concessions.
In the same breath, Israel has stated that until Hamas is eliminated as a military force and political body in Gaza, the conflict will not be over.
Well, we can get more now on the hostage negotiations. Our Emmanuel Honora is down at the IDF headquarters in Tel Aviv. Emmanuel, so David Barnea is back from Qatar. Any idea of where we are with those negotiations so far?
Right, and Bill Burns, the CIA chief, has also returned from those talks, and that really, Laura, just concludes the Israeli and the U.S. side of these negotiations that just started yesterday and lasted about 24 hours. Now, according to a statement from the Prime Minister's office, we now know that it's Hamas's turn to sit with the Qatari and Egyptian delegations and discuss all the options that are being proposed. Now, according to the same statement, a new unified proposal that combines previous proposals and also takes into account the main issues and recent developments in the region. Now, that was the main proposal that was being discussed over the last 24 hours. And of course, major recent development in the region is, of course, the killing of Hamas chief Yahya Sinwar in Gaza. And it will just really be interesting to see how the assassination of Sinwar might actually affect these negotiations, if it might actually change any kind of demand, any way of negotiating. Now, as you can see behind me, there's still a small protest today, not necessarily planned, but these protests have been going on now for the last year, and obviously small amount, 100 or so people calling for a deal for the release of the 101 hostages. So far, maybe there's a glimmer of hope, but still too early to know.
Emmanuel, thank you very much. Emmanuel Honora there down in Tel Aviv. Yaki Dayan is with me in the studio. He's the former Israeli consul in Los Angeles. So, Yaki, is it too soon to hope for a breakthrough this time? And how does the death of Sinwar alter the situation?
So actually, the death of Sinwar can bring a change if only if the Americans would use their leverages on the Qataris, because the Qataris are not an honest broker. I mean, they are supporting Hamas, and the entire leadership of the Hamas now is located in Doha, in Qatar. It's not like before that Yahya Sinwar was running the entire show from Gaza. Now the main focus of the Hamas leadership is in Doha. So if the Qataris would use their leverages, obviously, they don't want him to use the leverages, but if they had used the leverages, we would have seen a change in the dynamic of the negotiations. Now, the question is if the Americans are willing to pressure, to push, to use all the leverages on the Qataris in order to make some kind of a change. But definitely, the death of Sinwar can lead to a change. It depends very much on the Americans and how the Americans are going to conduct the negotiations right now.
And I guess we'll find out in the coming days. For now, Yaki, thank you. Well, to talk in a bit more detail about the Egyptian proposal that's on the table, we're joined by Miret F. Mabrouk. She's a senior fellow and the founding director of the Egypt and Horn of Africa programme at the Middle East Institute. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. There have been some reports that Hamas is open to the Egyptian proposal. Do you have any more information on that?
I don't actually have any more information on that. First of all, thank you so much for having me on. I don't actually have any more information on that. I would not be surprised if they were open. They are in a greatly weakened state, but I think any acceptance on their part is going to include some form of hostage swap and some form of withdrawal from Gaza. Now, considering the amount of damage that Israel has wreaked upon Hamas's infrastructure, considering that Yahya Sinwar has been killed, considering all of these factors, I mean, a withdrawal might be something that Israel might agree to. I've not the slightest idea, but I do think that Hamas, at the very, very least, is going to be sitting there and is going to be seriously considering anything on the table.
And from Cairo's perspective, how important is it for them to be the ones that manage to get a deal instead of Qatar? Because there does seem to be a certain rivalry there, just in terms of remaining a relevant player in the region.
Okay. I actually don't think that it's an either-or, because I don't think the Egyptians would be able to pull it off on their own. I don't think the Qataris would be able to pull it off on their own. And really, nothing is going to happen without acceptance from both Hamas and, most importantly, the Israelis. There isn't really a rivalry between Egypt and Qatar in the sense that they both provide different contacts, a different set of networks. They've really been working together on this. And as for Egypt remaining relevant, I think it depends what issue in the Middle East you're talking about. Certainly in this issue, I don't see any way of cutting into Egypt's relevance on the issue. There will be no negotiation that does not have, no truce that does not have Egypt front and center. So I don't think that is the question. I think the question is how to put something practical on the table that will be accepted by Hamas, but also increasingly, because we've mentioned quite rightly that the death of Yahya Sinwar might open up avenues to possibly a truce. But then on the other hand, my understanding from Israeli politics is that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has also been fairly reluctant to accept any truce. And therefore, we have to realize that despite the best, despite the best considerations of both the Egyptians and the Qataris and the Americans, it really is going to be something that for Hamas and Israel to step up on.
And Qatar differs from Egypt, of course, doesn't it, in that Gaza is right on Egypt's doorstep. Egypt used to, in fact, control Gaza. Does it have a strategy when it comes to the reconstruction of Gaza and what it would like Gaza to look like and who would control Gaza in the future?
So Egypt used to administer Gaza rather than control Gaza. They're two very, very different things. And again, I think we're looking at it slightly backwards. any viable strategy for Gaza is going to have to be something that Israel comes up with in coordination with whatever Palestinian entity is going to be in charge. It's not going to be Hamas, obviously, but also Israel has said that it won't accept a PLO entity either, which makes life difficult. In Egypt's case, as is the case with, I think, most Arab countries, Egypt would be interested in, would be delighted to help with reconstruction, with administration, with any help there is. It will not, I think, and this is important, to be part of any multinational force, and neither will any other Arab country if there is no viable, at least, track towards a Palestinian state, because it won't want to be seen as complicit in an Israeli occupation. But you are absolutely correct in thinking that the welfare and the security of Gaza is extremely important to the Egyptians, because it's been a conflict raging on their borders, and they already have two other conflicts raging on two other borders. So the swifter a path to some sort of secure stability, the better it would be for the Egyptians.
All right.
Not to mention, of course, the Palestinians and the Israelis.
Thank you very much, Miret Mabruk. We appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yaki Dayan is with me in the studio. Your reaction to what you just heard, how do you foresee a role for Egypt in all of this?
One point, Laura, is that Egypt can be part of the any future agreement on Gaza. Israel should make sure that Qatar isn't. I mean, we remember the envelopes and the money and the cash that were flown to Gaza by the Qataris. Israel should insist that Qatar might be a mediator now, but shouldn't be part of any future agreement. Egypt has to be part of any future agreement because, as you said correctly, Egypt has a border with Gaza, so definitely they should be a significant player over there.
And they will be affected by what happens in Gaza, because even though they've been taking steps to really fortify the border with Rafah, they will be affected by what goes on in Gaza.
Absolutely. And, you know, it's the reason that Gaza was so much full with weaponry was because the passage between Egypt and Gaza, Rafah, was completely open. So that has to be taken into consideration. That has to be, something has to be done over there, and we cannot depend totally and solely as before on the Egyptians, because we saw what was the outcome of that.
What about what Miret was saying about there seems to be a perception in the Arab world that Israel has been holding up a hostage deal, that Israel is reluctant to agree to some kind of hostage deal, when the fact is that Hamas has rejected all of the deals. I mean, how do you explain that?
So the Hamas is demanding few things which Israel couldn't accept. One was a complete withdrawal of the Israeli army, a complete cessation of this war, and definitely they are requesting a number of terrorists to be released from Israeli jails that has blood on their hands, but significant ones, and those are sticking points on any solution. But one of the I think understandings after October 7th is that Israel cannot leave definitely in the south, but also in the north, without having some kind of a buffer zone. So even if Israel pulls out and there is some kind of a solution with an international force and all of that, still Israel will have to maintain some kind of a buffer zone in order not to have the October 7th repeating itself, as the Hamas declared that they want to do it again and again and again.
And just finally, do you think Hamas has been degraded enough that it can never retake power in Gaza? And is Prime Minister Netanyahu wrong to rule out the Palestinian Authority governing Gaza?
So on the military side, yes, for a long run. On the administrative side, no. I mean, still Hamas is controlling Gaza, and still significant changes have to be done over there in order to make sure that the Hamas doesn't control the administration. And that means, having said that, you have to have some kind of an alternative force coming into Gaza and controlling the administration, and still such a force hasn't been found. So as long as you don't have some kind of a force controlling the administrative side, still there is no solution to the war in Gaza.
All right, Yaki Dayan, we appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, to other news now, and 10 Iranian police officers were killed in an attack on a convoy in the restive province of Balochistan today. The Baloch ethnic group live in Iran, Afghanistan and Pakistan, and all three countries have been dealing with a low-level insurgency for years. Iran and Pakistan each carried out strikes on each other's countries' Baloch regions earlier this year. Well, to talk more about that, we're joined by Ahmed Qureshi. He is a journalist and TV host based in Pakistan. Good to see you, Ahmed. Great to have you with us again. Is this recent attack on these Iranian police officers by Baloch separatists linked to the escalating tensions in the region? And where does Pakistan stand on this?
Yeah, it's good to be with you, Laura. So this is a very, very interesting story, and it just kind of was lost in the aftermath of the Israeli strike on Iran. And I can imagine right now in Tehran, the authorities would be very, very paranoid that this attack might have something to do, although it doesn't, but it might have something to do with the Israeli strike. And this is exactly the kind of thing they fear, that, you know, this time the Israeli strike was like 4 hours, but if that kind of conflict extends and is bigger, like, you know, sometime in the future, this could encourage local separatists to, you know, get it into action and start attacking Iranian authorities. So we don't know much really about who did this right now, and which I can imagine would add to the paranoia of the authorities in Tehran, because no group or no militant group has really claimed responsibility. Usually this doesn't happen. Usually the groups that are active in the Iranian Balochistan usually claim responsibility, and they're very proud of what they do. But at this time, probably it's calculated. Probably they would like to add to the confusion of the Iranian authorities, but nobody has claimed so far. So, but this is a big deal. 10 policemen to be killed in a single attack. It's a big thing. I was scanning the Iranian media, and I did not. Usually, this incident in this region, Balochistan, adjoining Pakistan, would usually get a lot of coverage in the Iranian media. This time didn't, because of the aftermath of the Israeli strike. But it's not good to have the IRGC, which is the Revolutionary Guards who are involved all over the region. It's not good to have them paranoid, because as you referred in your introduction, the last time they were paranoid, they actually fired missiles into Pakistan and also Iraq and Syria, claiming to have hit Mossad outposts. And then they stepped back from that story when Pakistan actually, unlike Syria and Iraq, Pakistan took offense to that and responded, obviously, by firing missiles inside Iran. So, but this gives you an idea that having the IRGC paranoid, like there would be, I can imagine. They're not speaking, they're not saying anything. I haven't heard any statement except for saying, you know, Iranian authorities saying we're investigating. But I can imagine this would be of extreme concern to them for this to happen just a few hours after Israel finishes its strike.
Absolutely. And so for Pakistan, what is their relationship like with Iran, 10 months after that very perilous time when the two countries did come to blows over Balochistan? Where does Pakistan on the situation right now?
So despite tensions, and there are tensions often on and off, the political communications between the two governments and the two militaries, they have excellent communication channels. And they should be, obviously, because they're always on standby, and there could be, you know, anything, any incident of the kind that happened earlier this year with Iranian missiles being fired into Pakistan and Pakistan responding. So to avert this kind of a situation, I can imagine that the authorities in both countries are always on a standby on their border, but at the same time, they have excellent communication links, you know, because they need to resolve conflicts immediately before they escalate. So they have those communications, they maintain good communications, they talk to each other, but at the same time, we have this tense situation in that region, you know, and the blows, they came to blows early this year. It's tense. And I can imagine the Pakistani authorities would be very, very careful now. They understand that for the IRGC and for Iran to be tense like they are right now after the Israeli strike, and with this incident happening right very close to the Pakistani border, I can imagine Pakistan and Pakistani authorities would be very, very carefully monitoring the situation on the Iranian border.
Yeah, and lest we forget, Pakistan is a nuclear-armed state, so we don't want any escalating tensions there. Great to talk to you, as always, Ahmed Qureshi. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura.
Well, Israel's strike on Iran was also a blow to Russia's Vladimir Putin. Moscow supplies Iran with the S-300 missiles that were destroyed on Saturday. Meanwhile, in better news for Putin, a pro-Moscow political party has just won elections in Georgia. The pro-Western opposition has made allegations of vote rigging. To talk more about all of this, we're joined by Anna Boshkovskaya. She's a senior fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Great to have you with us, Anna. So let's start with the missiles or the missile defense. It's the S-300. This is one of Russia's biggest arms exports. How damaging are these strikes by Israel to Russia's reputation?
Thanks for having me. It's always great to be on your show. I think we need to look at the bigger picture when it comes to the S-300. It is an important part of Russia's military-industrial complex. It's considered one of the crown jewels of Russia's military exports, but it is also not the top-of-the-line weaponry. Russia has the S-400 and actually has been developing the S-500. Certainly in Ukraine, where Russia has directed most of S-300, these air defense systems have not shown themselves to be a failure. There is a lot we still don't know in terms of the details of the Israeli strike. And here the devil, I would say, would be precisely in the details. If these S-300s have proven themselves to be a failure in Iran, it would be a blow to Russia's prestige for sure. But there's still a lot we don't know about what happened, what was struck and how. So I would be a little bit cautious in terms of jumping to conclusions, but it is, to be sure, an important development.
And the relationship between Iran and Russia has developed over the years. Iran supplies Russia with drones for its war in Ukraine, and the Russians supply Iran with missile defense. How quickly, if it does indeed need to, would Russia be able to replenish Iran's stocks of missiles?
I think at this stage, it's again, I think it's too soon to tell that there's going to be a major change. There doesn't seem to be any reason why Russia would necessarily be unable to do this, other than perhaps a political reason. So I would be, again, cautious about jumping to conclusions. But also think of it this way: yes, the S-300s are important. But they're only one part of what Russia brings to the table in terms of military capabilities. So when it comes to other types of weaponry like artillery, Kalashnikovs, this is Russia's more traditional military advantage, if you will. Here, again, Russia has not been proven to be a failure. What is important, however, and actually, if I may look at your question from another perspective, it is important to think about what Russia could or could not provide to Iran. But really the question is, if the S-300s are proven to be a failure, what does that mean for Russia's relationship with Israel going forward? Because one major issue for Israel is Russia's S-400 umbrella in Syria. In other words, Israel has relied for years on Russia's goodwill to be able to carry out its airstrikes in Syria. If these air defense systems are not as potent as they seem to be, this begs the question of, could Israel potentially do more on Ukraine? And that is certainly something important to discuss going forward.
Fascinating. Well, let's turn our attentions then from Russia in the Middle East to the Caucasus, and a country that is on Russia's doorstep, and a country that Vladimir Putin would like to draw closer into Russia's orbit. This is Georgia. We've got some live pictures coming to us from the capital, Tbilisi, I believe. There are large protests underway following election results. The pro-Western opposition says the election has been stolen by a pro-Moscow party. What are your thoughts on what's happening there?
Well, Russia has been doing a lot to exert political influence in Georgia for years. And while OSCE, in particular, Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, has noted some irregularities about this election, they have stopped short of calling it completely rigged. However, that's only the immediate outcome of the vote. Russia has done a lot on other fronts, including through disinformation, through influence of oligarchs, through a whole host of other ways of infiltrating Georgia. an attempt to shift this country's perspective. And that, I think, is important because if we look at the entire South Caucasus region, Russia's influence in Armenia and Azerbaijan appears to have been waning militarily. But to make up for that, Russia has been gaining more politically in Georgia. Georgia has been essentially the poster child for post-Soviet integration. Together with Ukraine, these two countries are the top two countries that have most fiercely resisted Russia's influence. And the fact that Russia continues to gain influence in this country while also fighting the war in Ukraine is also significant in terms of what Russia is trying to do in the post-Soviet space.
Well, we're running out of time, but just briefly, without wanting to sound alarmist, could we possibly be looking at another Ukraine when it comes to Georgia?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily rule it out. I don't want to be alarmist either. Russia certainly can't afford to fight a major war, but the question here really is, without a full-on invasion, there's so much Russia can do short of a military intervention to exert influence in Georgia, and that is something we should be worried about.
Well, we appreciate it, Anna. Thank you very much indeed for giving us your insight into that. Anna Bushkovskaya, thank you. Well, that brings us to the end of tonight's programme. Do stay with us here on I24 News. Benita Levin is up next with The Rundown. That's next.
Shalom and welcome to Jewish World Weekly. I'm Khaled Ben David, and each week we're going to bring you the latest from the Jewish world, from politics to religion, entertainment to the latest trends, and everything in between. Join me each week as we explore the global Jewish diaspora. Don't miss Jewish World Weekly only on I24 News.
Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are?
Introducing I24 News' brand new news website.
On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips, whenever you want it.
So what are you waiting for? Download the I24 News app today.
Shalom. ¿Qué me trae por aquí? La necesidad impostergable de 600 millones de hispanoparlantes que ahora necesitan escuchar el mensaje judío e israelí en tiempos difíciles. ¿Cómo lograrlo? Cuento con ustedes para continuar llevando a lo más alto del mundo mediático una inquebrantable diplomacia pública al servicio de la verdad sin concesión alguna.
On today's program, Iran warns Israel of unimaginable consequences following the weekend retaliatory strike on military targets in the Islamic Republic is thus just the start of Israel's response. And what could Tehran's next moves entail? We speak to a security expert. Is a diplomatic solution across the northern front viable? U.S. Special Envoy Amos Hochstein is in Israel yet again. Hezbollah continues launching rockets towards northern Israel, including at the port city of Haifa, and the Israeli Air Force targets terror infrastructure in southern Lebanon. We bring you the latest updates on the ground. And Mossad Chief David Barnea is back from Doha with a new proposal following the latest discussions around a possible deal. Meanwhile, protesters in Jerusalem step up calls for leaders to secure the release of the hostages in Gaza, blocking a hallway inside Parliament. We speak to the Hostage Families Forum. This is the rundown on I24 News. I'm Denise Levine. Threats out of Tehran as expected. Intense fighting between Israeli troops and Hezbollah in Lebanon and against the Hamas terror group in Gaza. We'll bring you updates on all these fronts soon. But first, the Islamic Republic says it will use all available tools to respond to Israel's weekend strikes on military targets in Iran, as the extent of the damage from the Israeli Air Force strikes continues to emerge. Benjamin Netanyahu saying just a short while ago the mission severely damaged Iran's ability to export missiles, adding that Israel struck Iran's industrial factories of death. The precise 3-hour mission on Saturday involving more than 100 Israeli planes, exposing the vulnerability of Iran's air defense systems. But the chief of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards is calling the retaliation for Iran's missile barrage on Israel at the start of the month a sign of miscalculation and helplessness. Meanwhile, Iraq has filed an official complaint against Israel at the United Nations after denying Israel had used its airspace in Saturday's strikes. Middle East correspondent Ariel Osaran has more in this update.
The United Nations Security Council is convening on Monday to discuss Israel's attack on Iran over the weekend. Prior to the session, Iraq submitted to the UN an official complaint against Israel, condemning its, quote, flagrant violation of its sovereignty for using Iraqi airspace in the strike. Just 2 days ago, though, Baghdad struck a different tone, denying Israel had breached its airspace.
Iraq has distanced its airspace from open conflict, despite attempts to drag us into one. We stand in solidarity with the Islamic Republic of Iran and stand against this aggression. Therefore, it is unreasonable that the Iraqi airspace was used for this aggression.
Images on social media from Iraq even showed fragments of missiles used by Israel that fell in an area north of Baghdad. Adding to the absurdity, Iraqi Shiite militias claimed responsibility for launching an attack drone at northern Israel early Monday. الموت لأمريكا الموت لإسرائيل اللعنة على اليهود. Meanwhile, the scope of the damage dealt to Iran over the weekend continues to emerge. Minutes before the first wave of Israeli strikes, several Iranian air defense radars were hacked, enabling IDF planes to enter Iran's airspace unhindered. In addition to eliminating numerous air defense batteries and drone manufacturing sites, satellite images show damage to 2 secret bases used to mix solid fuel for ballistic missiles in Parchin and Khojer, near Tehran.
I would like to emphasize, these were not workshops that we attacked in Iran. These are not small explosive laboratories, as you know, from West Bank or the Gaza Strip. These are industrial death factories on an industrial scale, and we dealt them a real blow. I thank our allies, in particular the United States, for their continued cooperation.
After initially downplaying the severity of the Israeli strikes, the commander of Iran's Revolutionary Guards warned Israel of, quote, unimaginable consequences.
Our position is clear. We are using all available means to respond firmly and effectively to the aggression of the Zionist regime. Basically, the nature of our response will depend on the nature of the attack.
Iran now faces tough choices in its decision how to respond to Israel's strikes. As for Israel, it managed to expose vulnerabilities in Iran's air defenses, enabling it to easily step up future attacks on Iran if it chooses.
Now, as we just heard, the United Nations Security Council is expected to meet in the next hour or so to discuss Israel's strikes on Iranian military targets on the weekend, the precise retaliatory operation coming weeks after Iran's direct missile attack on Israel at the start of the month. Senior U.S. correspondent Mike Wagenheim has the latest.
It's another day and another meeting at the UN Security Council dealing with the Middle East. The 15-member body will meet this afternoon, 3 p.m. Eastern Time, to talk about Israel's retaliatory attack on Iran over the weekend. The meeting called for by Iran with the support of Algeria, China, and Russia. Now, Israel will have an opportunity to speak at that meeting this afternoon. Danny Danon, the ambassador to the UN, said that he will tell the Council that Israel keeps its promises and will protect its citizens against all threats. He said no sovereign country would tolerate having thousands of ballistic missiles pointed at it, indiscriminately targeting its civilian population. He said he will demand again that the Security Council impose crippling sanctions on Iran related to its military and economic infrastructure. Iran's foreign minister said that Israel's attack and other actions constitute a grave threat to international security at a time of an already fragile outlook on the Middle East. He said that the Security Council needs to make clear to Israel that such actions will not be tolerated and that Iran reserves its right, its legal right, he said, to retaliate at a time an opportunity of its choosing. A letter was also sent to the Security Council today from Iraq complaining of Israel's usage of Iraqi airspace to carry out that attack on Iran over the weekend, saying that it's a flagrant violation of their sovereignty. There's been no reaction yet from the Security Council to that letter. The Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, released a statement yesterday urging a halt to any escalation in the region, calling specifically to Gaza and Lebanon, but obviously a reference to the counterattack by Israel over the weekend. He called for a return to diplomacy and an exertion of maximum efforts to make sure that the latest actions don't result in an all-out regional war. Reporting from the State Department in Washington, Mike Wagenheim, I-24 News.
And while the focus remains on diplomacy out of the U.S., red alert sirens sounding once again in parts of northern Israel, including Kiryat Shmona and surrounds. We will be going a little bit later on in the broadcast to our man on the ground, Zach Anders, so do stay tuned. Right now, for more insight, we welcome to studio retired Colonel Dr. Jacques Nahir, former Deputy Head of Assessment in the Israeli Military Intelligence and the former Foreign Policy Advisor to Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, and correspondent Robert Swift. Gentlemen, thank you both so much. Much on the go. Jacques, I want to start with you. Iran is vowing Israel will face unimaginable consequences following those precise strikes on military targets in Iran on the weekend. How impressed are you by the precision of what unfolded in that 3-hour operation?
Well, I'm surprised by the fact that Israel realized a real achievement by going through air defenses, 3 air defenses, Syrian, Iraqi, and Iranian air defenses, and going through those 3 air defenses systems and hitting the targets that were chosen by Israel ahead of time, and with consultation, some of them with consultation with the United States, and some is our own choice. And I think that what's happening right now is the Iranians are waking up. It's a wake-up call for the Iranians, and because they have their air defenses destroyed. The S-300, S-400 have been destroyed. So they are left with very, very few air defense systems that cannot cover all of Iran. And they have to learn what happened exactly before responding. And this is why I think that a direct hit or response from Iran to Israel is not likely Israeli right now. I think that Iran would like to see Lebanon, and it is seeing Lebanon turning into the battlefield between us and Iran. Iran has, I mean, in the absence of a leader of Hezbollah, Iran has appointed an officer of the Revolutionary Guard to be the responsible of Hezbollah, and there are advisors, Iranian advisor on all the fronts of all units of Hezbollah, which means that in fact we are not fighting Lebanese Hezbollah, we are fighting Iran through Hezbollah in Lebanon. And we have seen that already since the elimination of Hassan Nasrallah and Hashim Safieddin. It was a period of hesitance in Hezbollah, but now it seems that they have restored their confidence. And what we are witnessing is, in fact, a translation of their will, or their goal is to empty the northern part of Israel. This is what they did, and they are doing right now. And yesterday there was this call of Hezbollah to leave, or to the inhabitants of 25 Israeli settlements on the northern border to leave their houses because they were going to be destroyed. So this is the ultimate goal of Hezbollah, which means this is the ultimate goal of Iran.
Yoav Gallant saying just a short while ago, Iran's strikes, the Israeli ones, on those sites with the most significant Air Force operations since the Six-Day War, and it changed the balance of power. You know the region well, you know the wars the country has faced. Your take on the impact of what happened in Iran specifically on the weekend?
I think that what happened is something that will be taught in academies for years, because it's a really an operation that few can operate like this, and certainly the only air force that can do that in the Middle East is certainly the Israeli one. And since 1967, you didn't see three waves of airplanes together with drones attacking deep inside 2,000 kilometers. After all, it's not Egypt. Egypt was less than 1 hour flight. Here you're talking about 2 hours flight there, 2 hours flight back. It's 2,000 kilometers, and pinpointing the objective. This is very, very astute, I would say almost genius to do something of the sort. And the Iranians have to wake up and see that the superiority of Israel is quite obvious here, and they have to prepare themselves. They cannot allow themselves to respond and receive another strike from Israel, because what happened on Saturday was in fact an introduction. It's an opening of the corridor, and now the corridor is open. Israel can strike at will.
No doubt that more could still be coming. We will take a deeper look at exactly that in a short while. Right now, though, hostages ceasefire talks have resumed in Qatar, with the head of the CIA and the head of Mossad taking part in those discussions in Doha. David Barnea touching down already back in Tel Aviv just a short while ago. Now, the teams reportedly looking at a comprehensive deal put forward by Hamas 388 days since the terror group's killing rampage and mass abduction on the 7th of October. At the same time, Egypt has its own proposal, which would see an initial 2-day ceasefire in Gaza. More in this report by our Jodie Natilovitz.
As efforts are being made to try and end the more than a year-long war between Israel and Hamas, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has proposed a new hostage and ceasefire deal. This as Israel's Mossad intelligence chief, David Barnea, and CIA Director Bill Burns headed to Qatar to resume talks about moving a hostage release deal forward.
In Egypt, during the past few days, efforts have been made to move the situation towards a 2-day ceasefire, during which 4 hostages would be exchanged for some prisoners held in Israeli jails. Then, over the next 10 days, negotiations would proceed to complete measures in the area or to reach a full ceasefire and allow aid to enter.
Earlier this month, Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar was killed by IDF troops in a move that was described as an opportunity to make progress on a deal that would see the release of some or all the hostages. While Qatar is host to several top Hamas leaders, The terror group will not be involved in this round of meetings, as Israel explores the potential for a preliminary agreement aimed at understanding Hamas decision-making following Sinwar's death, though the potential for joining subsequent negotiations about a larger deal remains open. According to sources, Hamas may be willing to accept the Egyptian proposal as long as it is incorporated into its July 2nd demands, offering a detailed agreement to negotiators for the immediate cessation of the conflict, the evacuation of Israeli forces from the Gaza Strip, and the exchange of a number of Palestinian prisoners for the immediate release of all Israeli captives. Speaking at a memorial on Sunday for IDF troops killed on October 7th, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant admitted that not all of Israel's objectives can be achieved through military operations alone.
Power is not the essence of everything. To realize our moral and ethical duty to bring our hostages home, we will have to make painful concessions.
In the same breath, Israel has stated that until Hamas is eliminated as a military force and political body in Gaza, the conflict will not be over.
So for the latest update, we now go live to Tel Aviv, and we're joined by our Emmanuel Honorat. So Emmanuel, Mossad Chief David Barnea touching down in Tel Aviv following that blitz trip to Qatar. What is known about the latest proposal? What update can you share?
Right, and that just about concludes the Israeli and the U.S. side of the talks. As you said, very quick trip to Doha as both David Barnea, Mossad chief, and Bill Burns, CIA chief, returned from Doha today. And in fact, the Prime Minister's office, the Israeli Prime Minister's office, released a statement saying that all four parties, Israel, Egypt, Qatar, and the U.S., discussed, and I quote, new unified proposal that combines previous proposals and also takes into account the main issues and recent developments in the region. Now, recent developments in the region mainly reads the latest assassination, the latest killing of Hamas chief Yahya Sinwar in Gaza in less than 2 weeks ago, and naturally how that might change, how that might shift Hamas's position when it comes to these talks. Now, there was an Egyptian proposal yesterday that Egyptian President al-Sisi proposed a 2-day ceasefire for the return of 4 hostages and Palestinian prisoners. Now, so far, it wouldn't be clear, it's not clear yet how many Palestinian prisoners would return in this exchange, but that would also just be a building block to a longer-term ceasefire.
Thank you so much, our Emmanuel Honorat from Tel Aviv, on this developing story. More to come, of course, in the coming hours. Thank you. Now, turning to efforts towards a ceasefire across the northern front, U.S. Special Envoy Amos Hochstein is in Israel yet again, amidst reports over the establishment of a viable framework for an agreement between Israel and Lebanon. Much debate, of course, over the UN Security Council Resolution 1701 and the role of UN peacekeepers, or perhaps the lack of role. Meanwhile, Hezbollah continues launching rockets towards northern Israel, and the Israeli Air Force is targeting terror infrastructure in southern Lebanon. So for the latest update, let's go live to correspondent Zach Anders. He joins us from northern Israel. And Zach, as we started the show, red alert sirens sounding in parts of northern Israel, rockets being launched from Lebanon earlier on in the day, including towards Haifa. What is the latest where you are? What can you tell us?
Well, Benita, the helmet goes on when stuff is flying overhead, and that's what's been the story of the last 30 minutes. A lot of activity here, from what we can tell, mostly Israeli. We had a couple of what appeared to be artillery rounds, but usually the artillery you can't see. We would hear the characteristic boom of the artillery, but then we would actually see the round bright red streak across the sky, and it was right overhead because we're close to one of those artillery batteries. And then helicopters popping flares overhead. The alarm went off, and what appeared to be 2 interceptions taking place very close by. So as a precaution, of course, we're getting closer, inching closer to our concrete barriers in case that alarm does sound again. It seems like the activity has picked up quite a bit in the last 30 minutes. What we're looking at today, the IDF says 115 different projectiles launched from Lebanon into northern Israel by 4 p.m. There hasn't been an updated number, but we've reached out to the National Ambulance Service. We don't have any reports of casualties in northern Israel here today, and no significant damage caused, Benita, by some of these rocket attacks that, again, continue to or appear to be mostly successfully intercepted.
I'm glad you've got that helmet on right now. Meanwhile, intense Israeli airstrikes in parts of Lebanon, several buildings collapsing. We saw some of the footage earlier on in the day. Bring us up to speed.
Well, the most really incredible images are coming out of Tyre, the southern coastal town, where we have seen strikes before, but they've mostly over the last year been contained to targeting individuals on a motorcycle or on a vehicle. This was large-scale, multiple airstrikes, taking down buildings, hitting from what Lebanese media reports are calling apartment blocks. The IDF is saying that these are different weapons production sites in Hezbollah's control and certain facilities belonging to their Aziz unit, which the IDF says is the Hezbollah unit controlling southeastern Lebanon, or southwestern Lebanon, rather, along the coastline. What we saw overnight, strikes in the same area. Lebanese media channels reporting multiple dead, scores wounded from overnight strikes in this city in the early morning hours today. But the main call for evacuation comes out earlier this afternoon from the IDF Arabic spokesperson. We've since learned that phone calls for those cell phone numbers that were in the area were issued with the IDF warning those people to get out of essentially multiple city blocks before the airstrikes commenced within about 2 hours of that call to evacuate. Within the, and this might speak a little bit to how these evacuation notices are saving lives. We don't have any firm reports right now, not on Lebanese media channels, of the second round of strikes that came after the warnings of there being casualties. That's not to say that there hasn't been, but from everything that we saw, and there was a large number of television cameras, especially the Arabic networks, all surrounding this evacuated zone at some distance away, and they filmed and broadcasted the strikes live. So an incredible amount of firepower levied on that area, but it's not just the only area in Lebanon. We've been seeing strikes. There's been more in the Bekaa Valley, with Hezbollah channels saying that there were a large number of casualties, trying to coordinate resources and ambulances to head into the Bekaa Valley to pick up the wounded. But again, we're at this stage of the war, of the conflict, where Hezbollah is not posting their losses. They haven't for weeks. And so we're relying here on the Lebanese Ministry of Health. We're hearing that they're overtaxed, the scale of everything that's now in their role and capacity has been very difficult for them to be able to coordinate some of this information. That said, the Lebanese Ministry of Health has updated and said more than 2,700 people have died in this conflict now over the last year. So, again, an incredible toll, incredible price to pay as this war continues to drag on. But those front lines that are just over my shoulder across the ridgeline, those is still where we see the heaviest fighting, Benita.
Live from northern Israel. Thank you so much, correspondent Zach Anders. Stay safe. And still in studio, I'm coming straight to our correspondent Robert Swift, because we know that U.S. envoy Amos Hochstein is here in Israel trying to quell tensions, the very tensions that Zach is describing right now. But there is a new development in terms of the talks that were unfolding in Qatar on a hostage ceasefire deal. Bring us up to speed.
Right, so this is reports being reported by Khan in the Hebrew press. And this is just initial reports, that one of the members of the delegation, Brigadier Oren Setter, has reportedly resigned from that position. He was involved in drafting of some of the resolutions towards the negotiations. Now, at the minute, there's little detail on why he has chosen to do this, but the initial assumption would certainly be that this is unlikely to be a positive sign with regards to the likelihood of any kind of progress or breakthrough in those negotiations.
And Jacques, what do you read into this development right now?
Well, you know, we are witnessing a roller coaster. I mean, we're bringing the families up with the hope that we are reaching a deal, and then the next day we are just they're falling down. And I think that it's too early. We see now that the government is trying to change the proposal that the President Sisi put on the table. President Sisi wanted something very simple: 2 days of ceasefire and an exchange of 4 Israeli hostages and a few Palestinian prisoners. Now it has turned into a new plan. So we have to discuss a new plan. It's not for tomorrow.
It certainly is devastating news for the families, of course, waiting for some kind of glimmer of hope right now. We are going to take a deeper look at those proposals later on in the show. But Rob, I want to come back to you and developments on the ground across the Northern Front. You yourself have been covering that arena for a long time. And I want your insights into the difficulty that exists right now in detecting drones coming through from southern Lebanon towards northern Israel.
This is a problem that has been consistent for many months now. In the last couple of weeks, we've seen some big successes for Hezbollah. The attack on the IDF barracks, which killed several troops, as well as the drone strike on the Prime Minister's house. And even today, the reports that the Security Cabinet are going to take additional security measures when they convene. This is in order to mitigate against this threat, which continues. So far, Hezbollah have not been targeting Israeli personnel in Tel Aviv at the scale, but that's not to rule out the possibility that they can, as they have achievements, that they continue to reach for more ambitious targets. With regards to detecting them, I think part of the issue is that for many years, defences have been built to tackle the existing air threats. Drones are a fairly new phenomenon. They move differently, they move slower. And therefore, there's a difficulty in detecting them with existing technologies.
Certainly something that will be raised, no doubt. As you say, lessons are being learnt, and certainly that will include combating drone attacks from Hezbollah. Gentlemen, stay with us. We're taking a very quick break. When we get back, our coverage continues on The Rundown. We speak to the Hostage Families Forum. Stay tuned.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are?
Introducing I-24 News' brand new news website.
On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips, whenever you want it.
So what are you waiting for? Download the I-24 News app today.
Welcome back to The Rundown. Now, the Israeli parliament is set to pass 2 bills on Monday that would shut down the United Nations Relief and Works Agency operations in East Jerusalem, Gaza and the West Bank within 90 days. Now, that's despite a massive international pressure campaign against such a move, with Canada, Australia, France, Germany, Japan, South Korea and the United Kingdom expressing their grave concern over such a move. Now, the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken also urging Israeli officials against that decision, even threatening to restrict military help to the IDF unless Israel takes steps to alleviate the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Now, Israel is adamant the organization incites against the country and against Jews, not to mention the fact it has evidence that employees of UNRWA took part in the Hamas terror rampage on the 7th of October. Retired Colonel Dr. Jacques Naria, should it stay or should it go? Humanitarian aid, obviously, for Palestinian civilians is crucial, but a relief agency with employees taking part in a massacre and abducting civilians is unconscionable.
Not only that, I mean, the commander, the last commander that was killed in together with Yahya Sinwar, he was in the second house near the house where Sinwar was there. In fact, he had a card being a member of UNRWA. So I mean, this is crazy. I mean, this organization has been living and allowing terrorists to be inside it and to use its installations, its facilities to stock their weapons and ammunition, and to train new recruits to Hamas. And of course, part of them participated in the 7th of October massacre. We know that for sure. We have evidence that this is a thing that happened. Now, on the other hand, you don't have right now another body that can take care of all what UNRWA is doing right now. If you don't have that, it would be a disaster really to push UNRWA out of Gaza without having somebody who would take care of all the humanitarian aid to those Palestinians. Who would be responsible? Israel doesn't want to be responsible for 2.5 million Palestinians. So it has to be somebody else. And who is that somebody else? We don't know right now. So in the meantime, let's stay with UNRWA.
Which certainly begs questions, Rob, about the day after.
Yeah, it does. And that's a question that's been asked for 12 months. And the Israeli government hasn't really come up with a clear answer. They've ruled out the Palestinian Authority. That is the US's preferred option, or a reformed Palestinian Authority, as the US describes it. There is some capacity from the NGO sector, but as we've just heard, they do not have the joined-up, at-scale capacity that UNRWA has, and therefore you're left looking around for someone else to fill that space. Financially, much of that help could come from other states in the West, other Sunni states in the Middle East, but that's just money. Someone needs to do the legwork on the ground. Someone needs to get food to people who need it, provide the medical care. Who is that?
Earlier on in the day, Benjamin Netanyahu pledged to continue making peace with Arab countries without mentioning Saudi Arabia by name. When we talk about players that could come on board for the day after, Jacques, your thoughts?
Well, we know already. I mean, I've met with Sudanese, which was an innovation at the time. So I mean, we have the Abraham Accords. Have opened the doors to for other Arab states. Now there's other states that can be joined. I mean, we're talking about Oman. We're talking about Saudi Arabia, of course. I mean, not Yemen. Yemen is
right, not Yemen.
Part of Yemen, yes, part of Yemen. The one that is normal and not the Houthi one. And then you have Mauritania. And then, the Tunisia might be a possibility, which I think that right now, because of their president, it is not likely to have something with the state. But definitely, I mean, Mauritania, we have Sudan, we have Oman, we have Saudi Arabia. Enough.
It certainly is interesting to even hear the conversation once again about ties, relations.
Look, I mean, we had conversations. We had conversations with Saudis for almost 3 years. I mean, we were almost drafting an agreement about normalization. I mean, and we put aside all the problems. We would discuss Jerusalem at the end of the road. We discussed refugees at the end of the road. We just talked about, I mean, the bilateral relations, and this was okay. I mean, we met several times, and things where we began even talking about business. I mean, what sort of businesses could we trade together? So I think this is possible. But right now we have to finish first of all what has to be finished. I mean, the war in Gaza, the war in Lebanon, before, and of course neutralizing the threat of Iran before. I mean, otherwise nobody will join us.
Not to mention the threat that still exists within Gaza. Gentlemen, stay with us. Fresh new footage out of the Gaza Strip shows once again how Hamas uses hospitals for terror purposes. The IDF publishing video of an ambulance driver at the Kamal Adwan Hospital in Jabalia in the northern Gaza Strip. He was arrested on suspicion of involvement in terror activities, and during the interrogation, he confirms his role as a driver and a paramedic. This coming as the IDF and Shin Bet security agency carried out targeted anti-terror operations at that medical facility. The IDF saying beforehand it had helped evacuate civilians and patients and made sure that emergency care continued. Let's take a listen.
ومزدهر في وزارة الصحة في مستشفى كمال عدوان ومستشفى المعمداني. احنا موجودين اليوم في شارع الجباية في 24 من بداية الحرب لليوم، خصوصا بالفترة الأخيرة إشراف حالات المحيط وجودهم في جبال عدوان. وضع حماس العسكرية موجودين في ساحات وعلى الابواب وعلى المكاتب في مستشفى كمال عدوان، ولهم اسعافات يقوم بنقل الناس الجرحى العسكريه ونقل المهام تاعهم، بدل ما يكون للناس المدنيه. احنا كشعب في شباب غزه زقنا من الوضع، موجودين في المستشفيات، موجودين في المدارس.
So ambulances being used to transport Hamas fighters to their mission, so to speak. Jacques Neria, this isn't the first time. Does it surprise you?
Should I be surprised? I mean, Hamas behaved, like a bully in Gaza. I mean, he went to hospitals. Even the doctors tried to stop them, and they wouldn't hear. They would take the rifles, the machine guns, and put them on the roofs and hide in the underground of those hospitals. Use them as caches for their arms, for their weapons, and so on. I mean, there's nothing new in the fact that ambulances are being used to transport terrorists of Hezbollah, of Hamas, and all the schools, facilities, installations, everything is put at the service of Hamas, and nobody even dares to oppose it.
Certainly is chilling to hear that testimony. We wait to see the reaction from around the world. Gentlemen, stay with us as we go back to one of our top stories. Israel's President Isaac Herzog is today calling for the urgent and immediate return of the hostages in Gaza, calling it a binding order of the state towards its own citizens. He was speaking at today's memorial ceremony at the Israeli parliament in Jerusalem to remember more than 1,200 people murdered during the Hamas rampage on the 7th of October, most of them civilians, and to honor those killed in the subsequent war, which is still ongoing. 101 hostages remain in captivity. Still no official clarity as to how many of the hostages are alive. And earlier today, protesters calling for a hostage deal, blocking a hallway inside Parliament. Women dressed as hostage Naama Levy, as you can see on your screen right now, wearing blood-stained sweatpants, just like she had on that day during the attack at Nahal Oz. Earlier, a group also zip-tying themselves to chairs in the cafe inside the Parliament building. Just beyond devastating. Now for more, we welcome Daniel Sheikh, the Director of Diplomacy at the Hostage and Missing Families Forum, also a political commentator and the former Israeli ambassador to France. He joins us from Tel Aviv. Daniel, thank you so much. 388 days since the Hamas terror rampage. One cannot imagine still the families waiting for some kind of answer. Can't imagine what they're going through, broadly speaking. Is there some level of hope around the latest rounds of talks out of Doha? What can you tell us?
Well, Benita, how should I call this? A sliver, maybe, of hope? I mean, compared to nothing, which was our diet as far as negotiations and meetings go for the last few weeks or a couple of months. Yes, it's better to have some kind of contact than nothing. But if, as it seems to be, we're just going back to this model of to and fro and going to Doha and coming back, and then 3 weeks pass and the cabinet meets and the mandate is given another inch of leeway, that is not something that the families can feed their hope on. There was a moment of hope after the elimination of Yahya Sinwar. I personally think that within 24 or 48 hours of that shocking event, which necessarily shook the whole region and certainly Hamas, that was the moment to call for an emergency meeting of the negotiators and to put some bold proposition on the table. It should have been the responsibility of the mediators, but it could also have been an Israeli initiative. But that, unfortunately, did not happen.
That did not happen. And just a short while ago, my colleague Robert Swift was reporting on the fact that already one of the generals involved in the Israeli negotiating team now in Doha has just pulled out. So that certainly speaks to that roller coaster of emotions for the families waiting for some kind of slither, as you say, of good news. You mentioned, of course, Yahya Sinwar being eliminated, many asking how that might impact efforts towards a deal. As a political commentator, your understanding, who is making the decisions for the terror group right now?
I need to have enough difficulty understanding who makes the decision for the Israeli government. So I'm certainly not sure that I can help you on that one. But I mean, I'm old enough, and my friend Jacques Neria sitting next to you will probably not contradict me when I say that I have seen many terror leaders eliminated, and they were very rarely replaced by somebody more moderate. On the contrary, more often than not, you see them replaced by somebody who has to prove himself, has to prove that he's tougher, or at least as tough as his predecessor. And that's what I meant when I said maybe this moment of chaos and of lack of clear hierarchy within Hamas was the moment to maybe tempt them with something bold. But, you know, again, that's water under the bridge. It's been more than a week now, and I don't think that that is a relevant thing to do. Now, I don't know how exactly the Hamas hierarchy will function now. As far as I'm concerned, Qatar represents the Hamas position. They are mediators, that is true, but they are, for all practical purposes, the spokesman for Hamas. So it's for them to find out who calls the shots now on that side and who they actually represent.
And Daniel, stay with us, because while you're talking, Jacques Nerier, that you alluded to, was nodding on exactly that. And Jacques, I want your take on that exact question. So many suggesting that the elimination of Yahya Sinwar would change the equation, so to speak, when it came to securing a deal. Daniel suggesting that time has lapsed and it's too much time since that elimination. Your thoughts on who should be putting pressure on Hamas right now to secure a deal to get all the hostages home?
There are only two factors that can exert some pressure on Hamas. It's Egypt, because Egypt is in fact the opening door of the land door of the Gaza Strip, and Qatar, who is the financier. These are the two elements that can pressure the Hamas to do any compromise. But in my view, I think that Hamas has nothing to lose. This is why their position has remained as it was in the past. Unless there's a total withdrawal of Israel from the Gaza Strip, unless the war is declared the end of the war, they will not yield. They will not yield, because they hope that by the end of this war, if they are still there living and kicking, this is their victory. You will see thousands of Gazans going on in the streets, happily waving for Hamas. You'll see such protests in the Arab world, manifestations of joy of the victory of Hamas over the Zionists that have usurped their land.
And while I'm speaking to you, we can see that there is an update. President Joe Biden asked about a ceasefire in Gaza just moments ago. He says, right now, I'm going to get out here, getting a secure line and follow up on that. Quote unquote, we need a ceasefire. We should end this war. The war should end. And Daniel Sheck, Israel can't agree to withdraw. It can't agree to so many of the demands that appear to be on the table. It's one thing for the president just ahead of elections to be talking about the need for the war to end, but where do you understand the wiggle room, so to be right now for Israel when it comes to getting to the negotiating table to get the hostages back home? Your thoughts?
To your premise. I don't see any reason why the IDF, which says so in so many words, more or less, can't end the war now. The longer we stay there, the more we will have what we call work to do. We've been to Jabalia many times and to Khan Yunis many times, and each time we say it's cleaned up, and then a couple of months later, suddenly there is a new battalion of Hamas that was created there. The key to this is to offer an alternative to Hamas's rule there. And that is something that the Israeli government has shied from doing from day one. And since my reading is that there are only two options that should be off the table. The first one, that Hamas will rule Gaza, and the second one, that Israel should rule Gaza. There are not 100 different alternatives. It will have to be some kind of legitimate Palestinian leadership, most probably strongly associated with the Palestinian Authority. There's no way around it. But something has to be offered. If you say you don't want Hamas to rule there, when is the end? When do you put a full stop to this military operation?
Something we were discussing earlier. Continue.
No, I'll just say the objective remains to bring all the hostages back. But there can be steps on the way. And for example, this Egyptian proposal of a few days of ceasefire in exchange for 4 or 5 Israeli hostages, yes, without hesitation, by all means, whoever you can save today, because the term time is of the essence was never stronger and more concrete. Each day can be the difference between life and death for one or the other of the hostages, for whatever reason it is. The bad conditions they are held in, some kind of moment of anger of their captors, or unfortunately, an accident that happens through the operations of the Israeli military.
Okay.
Time is of the essence, hoping for some kind of good news. Daniel Sheikh, the Director of Diplomacy at the Hostage and Missing Families Forum, as always, thank you so much for being with us on the Rundown. Thank you, Daniel. Correspondent Robert Swift, we were talking earlier about this very point, the day after. Your thoughts?
Yeah, there's a point I want to bring from my earlier experience prior to being in journalism, which is when I served in Afghanistan. And in terms of a military conducting counterinsurgency, there's this thing that I think we observed there, which is that a military can degrade its enemy, as the IDF has done with Hamas. Hamas do not have the military capability that they had 15 months ago. However, once the military achieves those successes, it then begins to regenerate its enemy. You can only reduce an insurgency to about 10% of its capacity. And then just by the very presence of the military being there, they refulfill that organization. So by the IDF being in Gaza, they give new reason for teenagers to join Hamas. They give new incentive for attacks against the IDF. And I think that goes to the point that we were just hearing about, that the IDF has completed much of its objectives in the Gaza Strip, with the exception, obviously, of the hostages. It's looking for new objectives to complete, and that becomes a cycle which goes on indefinitely unless the military aspect is put aside and political means move to the fore.
Well, there's also obviously the argument that the IDF is in Gaza to make sure that what happened on the 7th of October can never happen again. And we're seeing the regrouping. We are seeing the regrouping in northern parts of the Gaza Strip.
Gaza is destroyed. 24 battalions of Hamas have been destroyed. We've seen what's happening in the West Bank. I mean, we've been fighting Hamas and the Islamic Jihad in the West Bank with 25 battalions, Israeli battalions in the West Bank for more than 2 years, and Hamas has not disappeared. So, I mean, it's more than time now. Since we have achieved most of the job, 90% of the job, we have degraded the power of Hamas. Hamas cannot return to what it was on the 7th of October. So it's time for us to say we are willing to end the war if you give us all our hostages. This is the deal. This has to be the deal right now, and this has to be the position of this government, because otherwise we will just go down again and we'll be in the mud, and again will be taken as here I have heard the new recruits will come day after day. I mean, you have there, I mean, a population that has nothing to lose, so they will go to the one who will pay $20 a month, $10 a month, the one who has the money, and the money is in the hands of Hamas.
There's no doubt that getting all the hostages home has to be the priority. Whatever it takes, we wait to see how it all unfolds. We know some major decisions need to be made, and they need to be made very soon. Benjamin Netanyahu saying earlier he promises to bring all the hostages home and to achieve the war aims he laid out at the beginning of the war. We wait and see. Retired Colonel Dr. Jacques Neria and correspondent Robert Swift, so appreciate you both being here in studio for all the latest developments on the security front. Thank you for being part of the Rundown. Now, something different. In Egypt, the Forever Is Now exhibition at the site of the Giza pyramids has offered artists and viewers a chance to reimagine ancient civilization through a contemporary lens. Our Jody Natalovitz takes a look.
It's inspired in ancient Egyptian art, but it's about permanence, absence, and what goes and what stays.
Against the backdrop of the Giza pyramids, 12 local and international artists displayed their creations in the surrounding plateau as part of the 4th edition of the Forever Is Now exhibition, transforming the historic site into a stage of contemporary creativity. Running until November 16th, the exhibition organized by Art d'Egypte seeks to, quote, blur the lines between past and present and provide audiences with a collective experience. The art installations offer unique interpretations of Egypt's ancient past, blending the symbolism of the pyramids with modern artistic vision. Italian artist Federica De Carlo's I See installation, composed of thousands of optical lenses, offers viewers a new perspective to the pyramids by creating an inverted view of Giza's landscape within each lens.
For me, it was very emotional to be here and to create something in front of the pyramids because it's very powerful, energetic, symbolic, and incredible place in the world.
I believe to see 12 artists from 12 countries showing their art in front of the pyramid, it's a miracle, it's a magic. And I think this exhibit will show that Egypt is safe. And the most important, that every artist will put in his CV, he put his statue or art in front of the Great Pyramid of Khufu and the Sphinx.
And that's where we wrap up the rundown for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Vanessa Levine, live in Tel Aviv. This is I-24 News. Stay tuned for more.